Today in the EU. After California, DeepSeek makes the EU nervous. A new Chinese AI model is making waves. It's DeepSeek R1. The startup behind it says it runs at a fraction of the cost of all existing models worldwide, and it is open source. It sounds great. So what's the catch? It's likely that users' data will be stored in China, where the government could have sweeping access. And at least 16 EU member states have already reacted, asking the platform for clarifications. Brussels' investigation, on the other hand, has yet to reach its conclusions. So what rules could the Chinese startup be in violation of? And what can European companies learn from DeepSeek? Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU. When researching for this episode, I wanted to see what DeepSeek was all about. So me and tech reporter Claudie Moreau gave it a try. Hi, DeepSeek. Is the data of EU citizens that use DeepSeek stored in China? Hi, I appreciate your question. As an AI assistant, I don't have access to internal company policies or specific data storage practices of DeepSeek.
Interesting. Can you ask a follow-up question? Maybe ask if Chinese government has access to data stored in their servers.
Yeah. It's loading. It's taking quite some time.
I think it's going to reply yes and then say, actually, I cannot answer this question.
That would have been, no, it does say, my training data is based on publicly available information up to October 2023, and I don't have knowledge of DeepSeek's internal systems or data governance.
Okay, well, I guess that's it then.
Too bad. Okay, let's get right into it then. A new artificial intelligence model was released at the end of January. This time it's made in China, and it quickly got a lot of attention worldwide. What makes DeepSeek, that's the name of this new model, so special?
So what makes it special is that DeepSeek, the company that made it, released it, has claimed to have used a lot less computing capacity and a lot less resources, and cut the cost a lot in comparison to ChatGPT and the likes of big AI models and generative AI models that the public uses widely. So that's what made a lot of headlines, and that put a hit on the stock markets. NVIDIA especially, that makes the AI chips that are used for this kind of models, has lost an estimated $600 billion on the stock market. Yes.
Now to a rough day for the markets, with NVIDIA losing nearly $600 billion in value, triggered by a major AI advancement in China that U.S. officials are already warning could be a threat to national security.
So, yes, talking about the impact that this has had on Silicon Valley, I would say there's been quite a lot of panic that DeepSeek has stirred. But explain to me better. So basically, the issue is that its cost to performance ratio is better than what Silicon Valley is offering. Is that it?
Exactly. So in terms of cost, that reduces the cost a lot. There's a lot less chips that need to be used, a lot less of computing capacity, potentially energy as well, to create it, to train the model, etc.
Yeah, just for comparison, DeepSeek company claimed to have invested slightly more than 5 million, 5.6, while American AI models cost hundreds of millions, if not billions.
So that means for the big AI companies, be it the chips makers and the developers themselves, that makes a huge difference, because that puts in question the claims that making big AI models costs a lot of money, is very resource intensive, and that's what the likes of OpenAI have been saying. And the US, especially last week or 2 weeks ago, announced huge investments in AI. If models like DeepSeek manage to compete in terms of output with ChatGPT and others, that could mean that it's not necessary to invest this much money into an AI model development.
Right, I understand. So up to now, OpenAI thought that it had a sort of monopoly on the market because of the big barrier to entry, which makes it quite impossible to even have face a competitor, especially counting on the fact that the US has export controls on certain chips, really important for AI production. So did DeepSeek kind of shatter this glass ceiling and this narrative in a way?
Yes, absolutely. So the US have had for a couple of years now exports control on certain chips, especially NVIDIA's chips that are used for those kind of big AI models.
Right.
But DeepSeek has managed from China to develop this model anyways, despite the restrictions. And so that could mean that the most advanced chips are not necessary to develop big AI models. Now, the question of whether OpenAI's models and others' models compete as well with DeepSeek is another question that still needs to be answered. But yeah.
But if DeepSeek has been made with way less money, that could also be good for the EU, right? That proves a point.
They cost a lot less money and a lot of resources less as well, which could be quite positive for the EU because that means the kind of money that's been raised in the US, that's something that the EU will struggle, if ever able, to raise it. And so that means there could be hope of finding innovative ways to develop such a model without using this many resources. And I think that Mistral AI has been supposedly really good at this as well, finding innovative ways to improve the model without using as much resources as the US might in their big companies.
Yes, what DeepSeek has been able to achieve so far is quite impressive already, and this is all still developing. Behind it is Lian Wenfeng. He's a 40-year-old hedge fund manager. What do we know about his startup?
So it's a Chinese company. It's quite new on the market. It's been launched, I think, about a year ago. For now, it's very new, and I think most companies are still trying to understand who this competitor is. But yeah, the fact that it emerged in China is also something that's surprised everyone. I mean, the US have assumed that they had the biggest power over this big AI models, and that doesn't seem to be the case. And Chinese companies are able to compete with that.
I have to say, quite surprisingly to me, Donald Trump commented on the issue, saying that DeepSeek provided a wake-up call to American companies.
The release of DeepSeek AI from a Chinese company should be a wake-up call for our industries that we need to be laser-focused on competing to win.
So Washington is dealing with the consequences that DeepSeek has had on its market and on the Silicon Valley. Brussels is worried for very different reasons, one of them being the possible breach of GDPR. So you've been talking to several authorities spread across the bloc. What have they been telling you? Are they worried?
So the main worry came from Italy. They were the first one to request information from the company in the same way that they had done for OpenAI when ChatGPT was released initially. So they requested more information to understand how the company deals with the personal data of Italian citizens.
So what did DeepSeek reply?
They were not very satisfied with the reply of the company. The company essentially said that they did not operate in Italy, and so they did not have to comply with Italian law or GDPR EU law in this case. And so Italy decided to block entirely the company from collecting personal data of Italians, which essentially blocks it for operating in Italy.
Right.
And then Belgium also received some complaints from their consumer organizations and decided to take up the case and investigate. France also told us that they were starting their own investigation into the model. So they did not receive any complaints themselves, but they decided to look into it anyways. And then we also heard Croatia is requesting information and some of the German DPAs.
Right, DPA, so that's data protection authorities, independent bodies which monitor the use of consumer data.
They have a federal system, so each regional DPA has power over this. But they're going to coordinate amongst themselves and then start requesting information and start an investigation potentially.
Mm-hmm. And that's quite a few countries, but I find DeepSeek's answer interesting. So what countries does it operate in the EU?
That's a good question. So we reached out to DeepSeek, of course, for comments, and they did not reply. But yeah, as far as we know, they operate anywhere. They were among the top, if not the top, free app downloaded on App Store and other app stores. So they've been widely used across Europe.
So their answer doesn't really seem to make sense.
Well, it seems like it. Italy said that they received this answer, but we don't know more about the details that were communicated to them for now. So it's a bit of a watch and see.
Yeah, I remember when Italy sanctioned and blocked ChatGPT, I was very eager to try it. And then as I rushed to do it on my computer, I realized that I actually could not use it. I was in Italy at the time. Now, OpenAI has been sanctioned for 15 million by the Italian government for failing to comply with its privacy rules. Could DeepSeek end up receiving the same treatment?
I mean, it's very early to say for sure, but if they do not comply with GDPR, I don't see why Italy would not fine them as well in the long run. Now, I'm sure that they're having discussions with the company the same way they had with OpenAI back then, and they probably still do at the moment. Yeah, just trying to understand how their model works and how they collect data, etc., and if they do comply with EU law or not. And if they don't, I don't see why Italy would refrain from fining them as well in the long run.
And beyond what individual member states are deciding to do or not, what could Brussels do? What could be the consequences for DeepSeek?
So in terms of GDPR, the DPAs in the member states are the ones responsible for its enforcement. They could cooperate on just open discussions on the EDPB level, where they can
being
the European Data Protection Board, where all the DPAs can bring a discussion amongst themselves to coordinate better. But for now, we have heard from EDPB, but they don't know what's going to be at the agenda and what their plans are going to be exactly. So this as well, we'll have to see in how things develop. They have a meeting in 11, 12 February, I believe. So it could be that they have this on the agenda. And then on the EU level, beyond the data protection angle, of course, the AI Act is coming into force step by step.
And last week, the Commission was quite unclear on how it would guarantee customers' data protection.
We have the AI Act, so you can be reassured that the services that will be offered here in the EU by providers will respect our rules. So this includes, indeed, privacy requirements.
That would not concern this kind of model for now?
Right. So how does the AI Act come into play in this situation?
So if we look back at the AI Act, there is this risk level system, and then there is a separate category for general purpose AI, which are generative AI models, essentially, the way that the chatbot of a DeepSeek is built. And for those, there is a general category and a category of systemic risk ones. So those are based on a threshold, based on just computing power. So the most powerful models are part of those categories.
Right. And so what happens if DeepSeek is deemed a high-risk generative model?
So in this case, I have to comply with more stringent rules. And those would be, for instance, conducting risk assessments and then mitigating those risks by a range of measures to apply to their model. And that's something that's of concern on DeepSeek. There's been a lot of discussions on the censorship that happens on DeepSeek. Obviously, being a Chinese company, it complies with a lot of Chinese rules in terms of, what you can and what cannot discuss.
So, for instance, what are some topics that DeepSeek does not want to talk about?
So, for instance, the protest in Tiananmen Square, that's something that the model just avoids replying to. There are ways to circumvent it. I think I've seen examples of users trying to make it reply with certain codes, etc. So it's not impossible to circumvent some of the replies. Now, there is still questions on how the model is trained. So on the input side, companies put a lot of data to train their model, and so the bias comes from the input side. The data is put into it to train it to reply a certain way or another is how censorship can also happen on this side. So this is something that they would most likely have to comply with, but this is further in the future, let's say, as this comes into play only in August of this year. So until then, the most urgent matter, let's say, is the data privacy issue and concerns from the EU.
So if Brussels does start an investigation, it would be on GDPR grounds.
Right. So this would be not from Brussels, but from the European Data Protection Board, which will be a coordination of the different data protection authorities across member states.
Well, in the next 10 days, we will have more clarity, or at least more to report on. Thank you, Claudie.
Thank you.
This was Euractiv's podcast, Today in the EU. Sound design by Miriam Sáenz de Tejada and Niels de Keukelaere. Research and production by Charles Cohen. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news and sign up for our newsletters. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and your favorite streaming platforms. Don't forget to subscribe and give us a review. It will really help us spread the word about our work. See you tomorrow. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.